Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement, and unfortunately, Courtney Truss is not able to meet with us today. But Sam, as sad as we are to not have Courtney here today, but I got to tell you, one of the things that's been fascinating the United States, if not much of the world, is this notion or this happening with a massive Chinese balloon floating over the United States, all that stuff, and just how did it get there? How did we not notice? Why didn't we shoot it down sooner? What in the hell was it doing, Sam?
Well, it's the perfect kind of piece of news. I mean, when you think about it, if I needed something to write about and had to create something, this is kind of right up the alley. It creates curiosity. It's our biggest geopolitical rival. It's kind of ominous. This giant balloon over 200 feet tall with a massive equipment underneath it. It's hard not to read kind of everything you hear about it, especially as it's in Montana, it's in Oklahoma, it's in South Carolina. Now we'll shoot it down.
Yeah, to me, it didn't make a lot of sense why we didn't shoot it down just as soon as we found out about it. Apparently, that's what the president said that he had wanted to do, but people from the NSA, or if not the Pentagon, advised him against that, largely due to the sheer size of this balloon. It's granted 60,000 feet up in the air, but 200 feet high, and apparently it was carrying equipment that weighed over a ton, if I'm not mistaken.
And the size of a regional jet. It's so hard to compare it to when it's way up in the sky in the pictures.
The pictures are like, well, shoot that bad boy down.
You could tell me it's the size of a big party balloon. It's just hard to tell. You have nothing to compare it to.
A 200-foot tall balloon, that's taller than the buildings in most cities.
Yeah.
With the exception of some of our bigger places. That's really kind of a 20-story building. That's how big this balloon was, carrying a regional jet below it, if I'm not mistaken, and just all that equipment. So understandably, the people in Washington don't want to get people hurt, but at the same time, kind of asking themselves a question: what all did it collect while it was floating over the United States? And is there no point in the United States where we can't just, I don't know, shoot it down, maybe over Chicago or something like that? Teasing about that.
Look, First off, I was in the camp of let's just go ahead and shoot this thing down. But I do understand. Look, neither of us are involved with the NSA or really the inner workings of it. But
are you so sure about that?
I think so. I'm somewhat confident. But I do understand from the aspect of, look, they're already getting any data. Yeah. They have low orbit satellites. There's not a ton of proprietary stuff they're going to get from this balloon that they couldn't get elsewhere. Maybe let's try and watch this and understand what's going on if we're confident that there's no kind of military aspect to it. And so I do get it. And this isn't the first one either, which I think is an interesting point.
That's what they're saying.
They're saying there's been several others back to previous administrations.
But the thing about it is, where's the data? You get some old defense chief saying, wait, I don't know what you're talking about, all that stuff. And let's face it, people could see this thing with the naked eye. And so somehow, we had 3 other balloons floating across the United States. No one was able to see them, but we could see this one. In any event, I don't know about all that, but I do know this. You're right about the low orbit satellites. Heck, they've got stuff floating around in space.
Everyone does.
Everyone does. All the major powers do. This balloon, you have to figure Beijing would realize it would be visible from the ground on a clear day.
Yeah.
So what sort of technology are they going to put on something that they assume the United States will end up shooting down?
Yeah.
What was the purpose for it other than just to be provocative and see what kind of response we would do to what was clearly provocation?
Yeah. It's hard to at least conjure up the thoughts that that's kind of at least, hey, at least icing on the cake, if not most of the actual, reasoning behind it. Like, hey, let's see what we can do. Other countries, U.S. included, are developing kind of hot air balloon technology, and there's value adds to it.
Back apparently. To the future.
Yeah, really. The balloons were used in World War II to start fires over the Pacific Northwest, and
those are called Haku balloons, I think, or something like that.
Something like
Haku,
that.
Like that.
But you're right. It's not new technology, but there's valid reasons why those can still clearly be a part of it. kind of an arsenal, and so it's hard for me to imagine they're not like, let's see what we can get out of this. Let's see what their reaction is to it. Oh, great, they didn't shoot it down. Maybe we take that into account for when we launch the next one.
I think what's kind of frustrating for Americans is it's really just, it's very visible now how other powers are kind of dinging us, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
The Russians just kind of giving the high sign to the remainder of the world and going ahead and invading Ukraine. What's their response going to be? The Chinese doing this type of thing, rattling their sabers in the South China Sea, running sorties over Taiwan, balloons over the United States. And for most Americans, not really completely used to this level of provocation, this amount of kind of pushing us a little bit, seeing how well we'll react. And it kind of makes me wonder if not if the United States is losing its role or status as the world's primary superpower, but whether or not a huge chunk of the world is just saying, we've just kind of had enough. And I'm beginning to think that increasingly so, and the more that I read, I'm coming to the conclusion that I think the latter is kind of more the case. I don't think these people necessarily want to start a war with the United States, but it's just like, it's time someone else had some say-so in how things are being run here.
Look, I mean, you go back as far as you want in history, and it's hard to be kind of the leading superpower nation for us, I'd say less than 100 years, really.
I would say really we kind of came out of World War I relatively unscathed.
Yeah, so about 100 years. That's not... We can't go back to 1776 and say we've been the global superpower since then. No. But even 100 years is starting to be kind of a long-lasting for a single kind of country that has not been switched, the government hasn't changed. I mean, really since the 1700s, we've had the same kind of country that we do now.
Well, you're right. I mean, we take a look at really some of the other powers throughout history. Something's changed within their governments or something like that. You even mentioned
the Kaisers.
Without a doubt, the unification of the German Empire after the Franco-Prussian War led to the German Empire, and it just all the various dynasties that the Chinese have had, and what have you, even the Russians. So you're absolutely right. I mean, so is this kind of what it looks like towards the tail end of empire? And that's a real big question. And as Americans, we hate thinking that, but when you take a look at what's called essentially the global South, the divide that's between the global North and the global South. And just if you haven't heard those terms before, they're, for all intents and purposes, go back to your history books and you think of the first world and the second world. The first world was sort of the United States and its westernized allies, Western Europe, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, largely South Korea, and Japan.
Yeah.
And Taiwan, essentially, for all intents and purposes. Those, and then the allies of the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, including Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, but excluding the stands.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, so the former third world, including the stands, and that's a lot of folks.
Yeah.
That's the vast majority of the world's population. You have all of South America with the exception of French Guiana, all of Africa, the predominance of Asia, and pretty much all of Central America as well. Out of a global population of 7-8 billion folks, we're looking at about 6 billion.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't these people want to have a greater say-so in how things are operate internationally? Why wouldn't they want to have a say-so in how things are bought and sold across the world? How international trade is done is still largely a remnant of the Bretton Woods agreement,
sure.
Although the dollar is not convertible to gold any longer.
But
the dollar is still the world's primary reserve currency, and you have countries like Cairo that get strapped for dollars, and then all of a sudden their economy shuts down because they can't trade in Egyptian pounds or what have you. And you see this play out really throughout the world. Sri Lanka ran into it last year when it couldn't get enough dollars for whatever reason, and so all of a sudden it's just like, why can't we trade in our own currency? And I think we're going to see a lot of pushback.
Even the South American countries coming together for their own kind of joint central bank.
Yeah,
I mean, you are just seeing it kind of in different ways, but kind of across the globe. Maybe let's kind of figure out how we can do this our own way. And there's probably a myriad of reasons why. One, just the length of time where that hasn't been the case. That's been quite some time. Two, I don't know if we're as fearsome of a country as we may have been previously.
Are you trying to cause people to throw their iPhones against the wall or something?
I guess so. I mean, I'm all for USA, but it's clearly, when you start poking the bear, you're going to poke it more when you're not as scared of it.
Well, that's a lot of truth to that, and I think it's part of. I think a lot of things are going on here. One, a lot of the remainder of the world has caught up to a degree. I mean, not maybe to the U.S. standards, but the gaps between U.S. technology supremacy, and I've talked with friends of ours like Sanjay and others about this in the past, the gap between U.S. technology supremacy relative to, say, India at the time of independence compared to where it is now, and it's much smaller now.
Yeah.
So while a lot of the emerging markets haven't caught up to the U.S., they've caught up enough where all of a sudden they're saying, hey, we need to be heard too.
Yeah.
Couple that with really, for the last 50 years, the United States has maybe not fought wars correctly, and maybe not left a lot of the world with a good taste in their mouth, and how we have exercised ourselves or exercised our might around the world. The situation in Afghanistan, what is now going on a year and a half ago, was kind of a mess.
Parts of Africa.
Just how we handled really the second Iraqi war without any real clear idea on how we were going to administer the country after we got rid of Saddam Hussein. The 20 years in Afghanistan, Vietnam War, and you kind of name it. I would understand why a lot of the global South is sitting there thinking less of the United States as this great, wonderful country with this marvelous monetary system and rule of law and just everything that we hold true as Americans, or should. Probably seen us more as a bully as opposed to actually sort of a global savior. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think all of that plays on top of the trend of kind of globalism on top of it. It's kind of a dangerous combination. It's not only are we shifting more towards a globalist kind of society, on top of that, a lot of people have kind of soured on the United States across the globe.
And so that has led maybe, arguably, to, if that is the case, then perhaps maybe globalism is reaching kind of a major hurdle here. Because if people in the global South are having a problem with the rules-based order that largely created during the 20th century with the United States kind of on top, they're having trouble with it, then almost by definition, they're going to be coming inward or trying to create blocks of their own, as you mentioned, in South America.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, then it's obviously not one world order, which obviously breaks down globalism just in general. But I think you're also kind of seeing it, just a dissatisfaction with globalization, not just from the global South, but also from the global North to a degree. Take a look at the factionalism we have here in the United States now, which is the greatest that I can remember in my life, and I'll be 55 in a couple of months. It's greater now, the acrimony is now greater than I can remember in my lifetime, for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why. And then you take a look at just what's going on across kind of Europe. You have that character in Hungary. You have obviously the war in Eastern Europe, nationalism there. You're starting to see a little bit more of this happening. It was the most recent presidential election in France while Macron won. Le Pen,
Yeah, we did a whole episode on this of kind of the push, and not only France, Italy is a big one. I mean, lots of countries.
And so while that's kind of right wing, you have in Latin America, you're seeing kind of not a right wing sort of nationalist push. You're seeing more of a left wing nationalist push with AMLO in Mexico, Lula recently re-elected in Brazil.
Getting out of jail and back.
The same with in Argentina, sort of more of a leftist nationalism as opposed to a rightist nationalism. But you're starting to see more of that. And again, it's just I would say just kind of in line with what's going on with the Chinese. You just keep on poking the bear, provocations. I think we're closer to the end of American hegemony and just being able to dictate what happens around the world than we are at the beginning of it.
I agree, but the one thing that I think some fearmongers start to talk about, which I don't view as a likely case at all, is the collapse of the dominance of the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
I mean, what else is it going to be? I mean, if you really ask that question and look for a valid answer, that kind of stops the argument right there for anything in the near future.
Well, that is why. Listen, you're absolutely right. There's not going to be a legitimate candidate. Some people would want to make the euro out to be it, but I don't. The world.
I think there's a better chance the euro collapses than.
You and I have talked about that, but the euro's been around long enough. If we were going to make a bigger threat, than it would have already done so. The Chinese currency is not completely convertible, and do you really want a currency that's
pegged to the U.S. dollar?
Pegged to the U.S. dollar, and then also, let's face it, how confident are you in the Chinese financial system?
Right.
So that's ultimately what you're betting on, and rule of law and individual property rights, all that good stuff. And we've talked about that ad nauseum here at Trading Perspectives. That's why I think what you're going to see are those regional trading blocks, not unlike what the euro is. You could very easily see it maybe an African trading block or a South American trading block or an Asian trading block or something like that, where they develop their own sort of monetary payment mechanism, where the Sri Lankans don't have to go out and try to find a bunch of dollars in order to trade with the Indonesians or something like that. You see more sort of regionalized things where people can work that out a little bit better.
But it's still, even if that ends up being the case, the dollar is still a part of all of those.
People will still have a demand for the dollar as a store of value. And what you'll probably see is, I think right now the U.S. dollar constitutes about 60% of the world's total reserves. I think, something like that.
Sounds about right.
We could see that dip down to about 50%, as all this other stuff is happening. That's probably not a bad guesstimate if that does happen, but that's going to have a very negative impact on interest rates, depending on how you look. It'd be positive if you're a pensioner and you're looking to get more income.
Higher rates.
It'll be negative for people that own longer-term bonds, because that intuitively should lead to a decrease in the desire for dollar-denominated instruments, and the vast majority of dollar-denominated instruments that foreigners hold in some form or fashion are debt instruments, and particularly those of the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah.
And so if all of a sudden we have less in demand for U.S. Treasuries, and since the U.S. Treasury yield curve indirectly sets interest rates across the entire U.S. economy, you can see interest rates kind of back up pretty significantly.
Really across the global economy.
Across the global economy.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we're getting into the weeds, but the gist.
You see, that's the problem when Courtney's out here. We get down a little bit too much in the weeds and we let our nerd flag fly.
Talking about Bretton Woods trade agreements and just coasting right past that one. No questions about that. But I think we're pretty much in strong agreement that and I may even be a little more optimistic on the total dollar reserve currency percentage. I mean, I just don't see the U.S. dollar going anywhere. I mean, there's no... even these foreign trade agreements between Argentina and Brazil or what have you, I mean, the dollar is still an integral part of what they're trying to do, and they can't... There's not a good way to kind of cancel the dollar out of that equation.
No, there's certainly not, and I'm not saying that's going to happen. Maybe that 50% number's a little bit too low for your liking. Maybe it's 56, 57 that you're thinking about. Even so, that decrease, even that percentage decrease, constitutes a lot of money.
Yeah, billions, trillions,
billions upon billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And that alone could have enough of an impact on longer term interest rates to cause, potentially some economic pain around the world. But moving forward, if the United States, and this is just my own personal opinion, not necessarily that of Oakworth Capital Bank and any of its shareholders, a lot of stakeholders, if the U.S. wants to continue to have that sort of overall global economic hegemony, it probably needs to get its house in order domestically. And that means let's figure out what unites us as opposed to what divides us, and that way we can present a far more effective unified front when the rest of the world is trying to poke the bear, as we've said a few times, and really trying to figure out a way around the U.S.-led system.
I think that's it. I think that the larger, I guess one of the easy answers is kind of going back to kind of who we are, like what is our response to things.
Yeah.
What do we do? What should other countries expect of us when they start poking the bear? knowing what that is, because it seems very disjointed.
It seems incredibly disjointed. Oh boy, I wish we had had a lot more fun at Trading Perspectives here this week. But even so, I mean, when you take a look at some of the headlines today, I don't think we're discussing anything that others out there haven't thought or have been thinking. So with that, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, let us know. As always, you can drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more, hearing more about what we have to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of exciting information. Sam, you got anything good to say about this topic here today?
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.